the Learning and Development Podcast, presented by 360 Learning. Hello, listener, and welcome to the Learning and Development Podcast. I'm David James, and today I'm speaking with Brian Jarvis, who is a Senior Manager of Learning and Development and who's embarked on a successful L&D transformation story that I can't wait to get into. So, Brian, welcome to the Learning and Development Podcast.
Thanks for having me, David. It's super exciting to be here. It's a big fan of the show. So thanks.
Thank you. Oh, you're very welcome. This is going to be a great episode. But we'll come to the L&D transformation shortly. But for the benefit of the listener, could you give us an introduction to the organization you work for and especially the arm of it that you work with?
Sure. So Waste Management is the go-to provider in North America and Canada for waste recycling services. So that is the company that I work for, but I work for an arm called SBS, National Accounts, which is roughly about a $3 billion arm of the organization that works with really the largest clients. You think about the United States, Home Depot, Amazon, clients like that who have locations spanned across multiple regions and don't want to have to manage that themselves. So we're the one-stop shop for them to be able to come in and handle all their needs from sustainability to waste, recycling, pretty much through the business that I support.
It's a huge organization as well.
Yeah, so we're tucked in, right? So it's interesting how we work because we help give our market areas more work to do. Although we're working with larger clients who they can't service directly, it adds into the work that our, the corporate shell that we work for, the green trucks that most people are familiar with. I think this is a good time to have this conversation. If you think about, I'm not familiar with golf, you are, but we just had our big golf tournament a couple of weeks ago, right on a Super Bowl weekend. A lot of attention for waste management, but it's a zero waste event. What's one of the cooler sporting events out there is that's part of what we do is we work with sports clients. And, this is a kind of our go-to event where there's no waste produced from a weekend of people going and enjoying some really high caliber golf.
Oh, I love that. Now, so let's get into it then, Brian. You've been senior manager there for just over 3.5 years, unless I'm wrong. But
spot on, almost to the
day. Let's rewind then to when you first stepped into the role. What was the state of play, and what were the early signals that the existing approach to learning wasn't supporting the business in the way that it needed to?
It's a really great question. And I think it's something that we all do when we enter into a new role, right? As we do our landscape scan. I was brought in more specifically to be a change agent. They were looking for somebody who's going to shake up the current model. And what I realized pretty quickly was we were supporting an important client, but they're one of many clients that need support. So if you think about the growth of the business that I support, it's been growing year over year since I joined and before I joined. So if we think about business outcomes, we're all talking about it in learning and development. How do we attach ourselves to business outcomes? Well, if we're growing, if I'm only helping one partner, I'm not servicing the whole business. So it really was the task at hand was to, get this partner's program up to a more modern and beneficial program. But also strategically, I wanted to make sure for the future that we were making a bigger impact than just with one client.
And every transformation, Brian, has a first move. So where did you start and why?
So it was an easy one for me, right? So a successful sales organization, they're doing really well. But if we're not helping them grow revenue, then I don't know why a support organization would exist. And it really started with early conversations within that organization with the leaders there to say, could you see the value of what we could bring to the table? And, in order to have that trust, we needed to be successful with the first bit of work that I just referenced. We had to nail the redesign of the program, and we were able to get some really nice wins. And because we are mostly on site, which I know it seems strange to say this, but it's kind of foreign for most people these days to be completely on site. The majority of us do sit in a building together. So we're able to kind of get a little bit of word of mouth around the work that you're doing, especially as being somebody who's only during this first transformation in the business for a year and a half, redesigning a program. But when they saw the impacts of what we were doing, it started to kind of gain momentum. Like maybe you should engage with them. Maybe they can do some nice things for you. So when we engaged sales first, it was about a year ahead of when we actually did the work. So I think that's an important call out is that conversation. I remember exactly where I was when I had it with the VP at the time. And he was on board, but it took time for us to plan, to strategize, to get a role funded to specifically support that business. Today, I sit with a team that's twice the size of what I joined in.
Wow. Now that I think speaks to the success that you're having. Now, a couple of things do spring to mind that I'd love to touch on. Number one is sales enablement. I had Timu and Frederick from Telia on the podcast a couple of years back, and they started out in sales enablement, but because of the success that they had, and their approach was understanding the root causes, and then whether it was a learning intervention or not. And from memory, I don't think it was wholly a learning intervention, but they were able to make incredible shifts in performance and outcomes, which led them to then take on learning and development. It's almost as if you get sales enablement right, which for me, it's like a canary in the coal mine. It's like if you're solving a real problem, a pinch point for your organization, regardless of what it is, in this case, it just seems to be sales, then you're going to get noticed for all the right reasons, which leads me on to the second point, which we've talked about so much on here, which is advocacy. If you're solving real problems and it is making a keen difference to influential stakeholders in your organization, then sometimes you might seek to capitalize that on yourself and ask for those advocates to amplify what they're saying to you personally more publicly. And sometimes that happens of its own accord, but it sounds as if you've really benefited, number one, from working on something which is business critical, which is the sales enablement part, but also from that advocacy.
No, you make some excellent points. And it's one of those things where everybody's really in their journey with us as a learning and development team, and the crossover to sales enablement has been important as well, because there is a sales enablement team, but because we are so ground zero with every partner. And also, I talked earlier about how we've grown the team. We 5x our business lines that we support, but they're all mostly in a very new state. They're learning how to engage with us, and we're showing them how to engage with us. And sometimes that takes time to build trust. And we've entered into everyone's sphere differently. There's been no simple like apples to apples. Hey, sometimes I go to a leader that doesn't even think about us and say, I think I can help you transform your training program and save you money. I can get it done faster, better proficiency, money in your pocket, right? As a business leader, as you're working through this growth, but also they're going to land and roll and give you that ROI back sooner. And that's a simple place to start, right? Going back to best practice. But when it comes to sales, we're looking for replicating consistency. It's tough because the typical onboarding for sales programs was you join and then you just kind of shadow somebody. So you're at the behest of how that goes, right? I mean, not everyone's built to be a trainer or a learning and development person. They just do the best they can. And that person just learns through proxy. So we were discovering that kind of proficiency was just variables for sales. So it's just too many variables were involved and not enough consistency. So a simple place to start them, but also now we're looking more at the skills this time around. So as each business partner is like, it's like a child. They're in a certain different stage. I think maybe that resonates with me now because I'm raising almost 2-year-old now. And it's like it changes week to week. Every program we're managing right now is evolving and changing as they grow into another year. With sales, it's now about skills and making sure that they have the skills to be successful, to maintain the momentum, as opposed to if we're not successful, say we are successful, but how do we keep that going?
Before we go into the rest of my plan questions on here, Brian, I'd like to zero in on something, because when you said, you're speaking to stakeholders and say, hey, I can help you with saving time here or saving money there, there's a lot of confidence that comes with that. Like I just think that if we in learning and development operated with that much confidence going into and saying, hey, I can help you with that thing that is keeping you up or which is causing you a problem, I just think we could go a long way. Where did that come from? Did you bring that into the organization? Was it other wins? Where did that come from?
It's so interesting that you say that. It's one of those things where, when you first kind of get into learning management, I have been doing it for over 10 years. It just felt like the right thing to do. It's always been naturally inherent. I don't think it's necessarily a superpower, other than just you want their problems to be your problems and you want to be able to prove it to them. Whether I was working in financial institutions trying to help them grow their, sales of checking accounts and loans, or whether it was, hey, we need to teach a product to healthcare professionals so they can go out and actually sell it. Like, that's the point. It's like we're trying to accomplish a goal together. Here it felt natural to just own their problems. I think, when you're trying to build trust with somebody, if you talk the language they speak, it resonates more. And to be fair, yes, I have confidence because I've done this type of exercise with many clients in my career and had been successful doing it. Every time we launch something new with a client, the night before we go live, there's still that like pit in your stomach. Like this may go poorly and I may have to like redirect the program and go in a different direction. And we've been very lucky that we've been able to really see instant results. Like it's been really cathartic to say we see the impacts almost instantaneously when we roll these things out because the learner feedback loops are strong. And then honestly, just recently we had somebody give us a huge win and we didn't even have to do the measurement. They teed it up for us. And I was like, you don't know how important this is to me because it saves me the time and energy to go and track this down, but you're seeing it real time and you're feeling it real time. And it's honestly, David, just with the best practice. Sometimes I think we think about all the shiny toys that are out there and AI, and that's all going to help us. And we're thinking about those things too. But sometimes it's just being really strong and just solid best practice. Like it seems so simple, but it really does help support your case.
Yeah, brilliant. Brian, listener, if you're going to take one thing away from this, and hopefully it's not going to be one thing, it is so much more, but I just love that phrase, making their problem your problem. I just think that it's so succinct. And I think that when I think my brain goes to, in the past, translating performance issues into learning needs, which was the first rupture, which is when learning and development says, I don't know the impact of what we do. I look at that moment. That is the moment that it became impossible to measure the impacts because you distorted what is a performance issue into a learning need. And what you've just said there is no translation. Their problem is your problem. I absolutely love it. But Brian, as things then began to shift, what results or changes made you realize that you were genuinely moving in the right direction?
It's been a slow waterfall of just measurement. I think the one thing I will just kind of lean on, I don't want to sound like a dead beating the same drum to a certain degree, but having enough feedback loops built into these programs to really have the learners tell you how things are going and pivoting, right? I mean, nothing we do is solid. It has to be fluid to a certain degree. And I know some of that is your design thinking and other things that you brought in, being iterative. We don't deliver the same experience except for the ones that are designed to be asynchronous. Those get updated over time, but we started to see really big impacts. And the first big one that we had was we shaved 16 days off the CE program. They were able to land into a role that's very complex. And, I don't want to get into too much detail, but our CE roles, it's not apples to apples. We work in a very heavy insurance area in Connecticut, and there's a lot of call centers, and those jobs they're scripted. You have little job aids and you can just transfer calls when things get dirty and ugly with customers. We don't have that ability. We are here to service the customer, understand them. We have 4 weeks to pull that off for somebody walking in from the business, never learned about our industry. So it's a powerful statement for us to make from a learning org that we're able to land them in a production environment. But that's through partnership. And I think that's the most important thing that I have to stress here is we can't do any of this without strong partnership. And that's the trust gets the partnership. Then from there, you have to manage your partners. And sometimes, it's not as easy as we claim the wins are. That's really the hard part for us, is because we have to maintain momentum, and it requires working with a business partner in a way that maybe they're not used to, especially because you're seated at the table. Then the other part of it was, to be a little more succinct on your question, is just we started to see that replicate itself as we tackled more structured onboarding programs for business units and learning that was targeted towards their individual line. It just sped up the education of the business, because when I entered stage left to start, there's a lot of smart people here. There's so many, and they care. And that's one thing I can't stress enough. They care so much. All that information is living in their brains. We have to get it out. We have to stabilize it for the rest of the organization.
It reminded me there of when I first joined Disney, and I had that where, I'm just working with such smart, driven people, and it really helped me to raise my game. When I say it helped me, it totally inspired me to raise my game. That I think that I probably operated on a different benchmark before, but working in an environment like that where you have got smart, driven people helps you to raise your game. But I want to go back to what you mentioned before there, Brian, because you said that you were able to reduce the amount of time for a program by 16 days. But we're not just talking about shortening or condensing a program. We're talking about readiness, aren't we? We're talking about the actual readiness to perform, which I think is the real result worth crowing about here.
It was one of those things where you work so hard in your life to get to like a level 4, if we're talking Kirkpatrick, and I've chased that rabbit in my career until to land the plane somewhere close to a level 4 this past year it's a cost save to the business. It's a cost save to my unit to not be in the classroom for that long. But it is truly taking somebody who doesn't know this business and putting them in a role and showing the data behind it. It can't just be like, we think they're ready. It was kind of an accident that we stumbled into. We were realizing through introduction of on-the-job training that they were getting more complex calls. We couldn't create the safety net of the call flow, and they would get a couple ones they hadn't learned yet. And what happened was we started to notice that they weren't as scared to go on the calls anymore. Like, I took a really hard call yesterday. They debrief in the classroom and say, you know what? I can do this. Like, I haven't learned this yet, but I managed it just fine. And then we said, you know what? Maybe we don't need to think about this the way that we're thinking about it. We need to start thinking about landing them a little bit higher, because their confidences were jumping through the roof. I mean, this last class that we're currently in, 2.1 confidence going onto the floor for on-the-job training, coming out there at like a 4.7. That's a 2.6 jump in confidence, because they saw what it was really like. The puzzle pieces fell into place, and they're like, wow, no, I do have what I need to do my job. And that's pretty much, not to boil this down to the basics. That's all we're trying to do, is give you what you need to do your job. And sometimes we over-engineer things because we want it to be like the A+ product, and sometimes it just needs to be what they need and they can move forward.
That's it right there. That's it in a nutshell there, Brian. But you mentioned earlier about partnerships, and of course we don't do this in isolation. That we only become able to do learning and development at scale, perhaps because we've got the partnerships, but also the buy-in from stakeholders. So I'd like to zero in on that and ask, how did you build credibility and gain influence with the stakeholders that you needed on your side? Because I'm sure what you're describing about isn't the expected or requested version of learning and development. For one, it's performance focused, not learning focused. But how did you build that credibility and influence?
It's been about 3.5 years. You said earlier, it's been a long road for each business partner. I think the initial business partner credibility was just, they've been waiting for a redesign in their program, and they just were desperate for something new. And then once they saw that we were sensitive to their needs, rebuilding it and then listening to what else needs to change, right? So we've moved them from a static state to a very fluid state, and then we're always reacting to what we're seeing from a trend standpoint. The other stakeholders, it was a slow and different approach for each. I talk with the other manager on my team all the time about, we're managing people. The work is the work. We've all been doing L&D for so long. The work doesn't really change. The tools change, but the management of the stakeholders is the most important piece. One client I came to and said, hey, we don't work with you. I think we could really modernize your training program and you'd get some real benefit from it. That seed was planted 6 months before I ever started working with them. And they came around and said, hey, let's just do it. If you have capacity, like, let's just try it and see how it goes. They experienced early wins. I don't think you can win a stakeholder over just through conversation. I think you have to be strategic about it if you want to grow your line, but then you need to be prepared to deliver. We're in a state right now, current state, where we are expanding our growth again. We're not getting adds to staff, and I don't want adds to staff, but if we're going to take on more work, we can't just take on more work and not deliver. It needs to be like a careful dance of execution and getting the wins right away for them.
And you mentioned there about being strategic with stakeholders, and I'd love to zero in a little bit more for the benefit of the listener here who's looking to perhaps develop their relationships and build influence. So what have you learned then about working with your stakeholders who perhaps were comfortable with the familiar way that things were done before and didn't necessarily see the need to do anything different?
It's a great question. And nobody was asking me to do any more than I came in to do. No one said, come in and grow your business. So I just was not comfortable being a support line with just one client. I didn't see the value in how successful a business was in that fashion. And that wasn't even met with open arms on my team. It was a change exercise for them. Like, oh, okay, we're thinking about this differently. And, when we talk about strategic, every business partner needs something different, and just recently I had that business partner that I went to say, we thought we knew what we were doing. And then they came in and we realized we had no idea what we were doing when it came to training and learning. And he couldn't put his finger on it because they don't speak our language, and that's okay. But having somebody speak up in a client meeting with all your business partners who are also at the table with you and your leadership team, advocating for engaging with us took us 3.5 years to really land that plane, but it's a great place to be. So I know sometimes I have a hard time traveling towards the point of your question, David, because I live and breathe the stuff all day and we're both very passionate about it, but you can't approach each one of them the same. They really are unique, and everything that I come into on a daily basis that has to do with managing them, it's approached differently. Communication styles, you really need to understand what makes them tick. And, I still rely back on what is keeping you awake at night. What are the things that are really troubling you? And mirroring myself to attrition. This year, we're writing goals that are attached to their goals, their financial goals. Like, I'm not going to sit back and just say creation of a program. We need to see the impacts that you're looking for through our.
We've discussed that on this podcast before when talking about L&D maturity. How nonsensical would it have been 3.5 years ago in those early meetings to have said to those stakeholders, without a relationship, we'd like now to align our learning goals to your business goals. Oh, you're laughing now, of course. It's nonsense, because they would have looked and thought, yeah, you're the training guy. I know what you're doing.
Yes, I just said that recently. I'm the training guy.
But 3.5 years later down the line, for everything you've just discussed there, which is thinking strategically about those relationships, focusing on impact, making sure that's amplified, you have the advocacy, so that when you're speaking with that stakeholder, the logical next step is, now we'd like to align. And they go, oh yeah, of course. Or, in whatever sense that makes, but, it's probably not as blasé as that, Brian. But certainly it was a logical next step for them, which is you playing the long game. And I suppose what I'm struggling to get out of my mouth here is, this is the point at which so many L&D teams want to get to, but aren't aware of the hard yards that you need to employ to get to this stage for that to be the logical next step. It's, there are very few handbooks written for this.
There really are. And, it's tough to see the bigger picture sometimes because you want to show people the impact. So I deeply empathize, having worked at bigger companies before it and knowing that you're making an impact, but having a harder time demonstrating that because people have a hard time seeing you for the future business partner that we're all trying to become. We know the evolution's happening in L&D right now around where we kind of sit, and it's a nice place for L&D to evolve to. But it has been a very long game. And that's honestly just something I've always recognized about myself. I never knew that I was as strategic as I was. I just kind of came to the realization that I'm a plotter. I always think big picture. I think long game. I don't think short term. And that has benefited me with the situation. And it kind of goes without saying that you need champions. So you have to go and build them yourself. And that takes time. You can't build a champion by offering a great program. You need to build a champion by saying, I'm going to fix some of your deepest problems, and then show them that you are making that needle move. And you have to have those systems built into place to prove it to them. Because if you're not proving your value, I've always gone through my career with a sense of like always looking over my shoulder of like, am I doing enough to keep the wolves at bay as a support business? And the best way to do that is to integrate into business partners and really make them a partner. And there's no easy way to do that. So for your question, and for folks who are struggling with that, start with one situation, start with one place you want to make an impact. And it may take you time to get through, but when you get through, make sure you're ready to deliver something that is going to make them notice. And because we said it earlier, starting with sales, that head of sales became the vice president of our organization. So he is an important champion of the work that we're doing, because we had already proven to him what we're capable of before he was brought up to that next level. So he's integrated us to a level that even I didn't expect.
So what great tip there, Brian, because when I was at Disney as well, the sales folks were at the top, were the very head of the organization running it as well. So talking about being strategic about where you put your time and make your impact. But I'd love to go now to think about how, as your approach evolved, what new practices or habits helped your team work in a more business aligned way?
It's a combination of things. I know we brought in some new tools. I think that's where our alignment to corporate L&D helps us, right? It's technology, right? It's keeping fresh with technology, challenging how we get work done, not relying on just the simple deliverables that we can fall into. We did go and get certified at 5DI last year as a team, which, you know, design thinking was hard for me personally. I'll be very transparent and vulnerable. Like, I was like, what do you mean I don't have to deliver an A+ product? I spent my whole career making sure that like I walked the stakeholder through 60, 80, 100% of what they wanted. And now it's like design thinking means you deliver at 70%. Sometimes that's all they want and they move on. And it's like, wait, but I need to touch it up. I need to do things to it. I need to make it pretty. And with 5DI, it was like, you're not even thinking about the right solutions, like knocking down the head. And it was like a real revelation of like, I've never stepped back in my practice and looked at the true art of the possible. So that's been new for us too. So doing that exercise has shaped how we do intakes, how we walk through understanding how we want to design a program in a much different fashion than we were doing even 2 years ago. So that was probably the biggest change, is implementing a whole different design process, why we were having some success. The analogy I use is like Tiger Woods was winning all these golf tournaments and doing well for himself, and then decides to change his swing. Like, are you insane? And it worked out well for him. So we have to be comfortable ourselves with implementing new ideas and practices into our world too.
Oh, 100%. I know. I love that you mentioned there. You were working with Nick Shackleton-Jones on the 5DI model there, which says to me that you're big into your own team's development. So, as well as the approaches, what skills have been important for you and your team to grow during this transformation?
What a great question. The one that I always continue to harp on, and it relates to our earlier conversation, is influence. We have to have an ability to not commandeer our business partners. But if we know there's things that we want to accomplish, we can't be unintentional about it. We have to have conviction about what our approach is going to. And, I give my team the autonomy to say, like, listen, if it doesn't go well when we launch something, that's why we iterate. That's the whole point. It's not going to be a disaster. There's too many people involved that have L&D backgrounds. So that when I think about skills for us, it really is, can you really influence your stakeholder for best practice? And it seems simple, but having worked in multiple organizations, best practice was always lost. It was like, we just have forgotten about the simple stuff, like just simple feedback loops, simple Kirkpatrick levels embedded in programs. I would alarm some people with some of the stuff that I've seen in other organizations. And it's not to knock them by any stretch. And I'm not talking, it's just, that's where we need to refocus. So with my team, it really comes down to continuing to always look at development in terms of skills for design. Design's changing and evolving. Microlearning was the hot thing 10 years ago. Now it's AI, coaching, customization. What's realistic for where we are as a learning organization to implement, and where might we actually turn a learner off?
And it's really interesting there that you say that, because what I'm taking from this conversation and what I firmly believe is that regardless of the tools that might come and go, might be in vogue, some might stay, some might go, the cornerstone of our profession is our ability to consult. It's our ability to identify, recognize root causes. It's about our ability to influence stakeholders to expect more than they do of learning and development. And then whatever it takes to make impact, I suppose then is the marketing part, the amplification. That's the cornerstone of where we are right now. And I haven't mentioned a single type of solution within that, because you do it by hook or by crook. When I was at Disney and we had an awful tech infrastructure, so everything was just so labor intensive, but I still lived and breathed by my ability to actually to make impact. So yeah, we were people heavy. We'd throw an army of people, and it was about the partnerships, the buddying, and the role of the subject matter experts to make sure that we were amplifying the right know-how. But it was all about impact in the end. And fast forward 10, 11 years, we have the smart tools available to us, but we are at a crossroads. We either use smart tools to do dumb things, or we use smart tools to do the right things. And I think that what you're talking about here is that it almost doesn't matter. Stop zeroing in. If you don't understand the problem, then your solutions can be part of that problem.
I will always chuckle at that phrase, right? We have all these tools, but what do we do with them, right? And it's sometimes, the one thing I caution my team is don't get in the habit of doing things that feel comfortable. Sometimes you get in the habit of like, oh, it's going to be a RISE module. It's going to be this. And sometimes it's just a resource. And that's honestly the biggest takeaway, not to just keep bringing it back to Nick, because he's not paying me to say this, but he got me to think about, okay, although they do need a module that teaches them this in 5 minutes, it's not training. It's just a resource. And like, how do I help the learner just have what they need to be successful? So great call out there, right? Because the tool is just the resource for them to have what they need to be successful. And I think you do gain credibility when you're in the foxhole with your business partner because you care as much as they do about being successful. And I've also been in the other end of the table too, where even where we've had success and impact, they're not going to get credit for it. So I can empathize with folks who may listen to this and say, well, I do make an impact, but my business partner doesn't want to give me credit because of the function that we're in. And that's a real thing too, but just know that they may not say to, but they don't take that work for granted. Because if you walked away and didn't have that level of support, they're going to feel it. They're going to feel it right away.
They really are. And I'd love to zero in on that as well, Brian, because if you're looking at where you are now, and I suppose not peeling the curtain open too far, because of course, WM proprietary knowledge is WM proprietary knowledge. But what do you see as the most meaningful impact that your L&D team is having on your organization?
Readiness, just, making sure that we have such a good culture. I say that with strength. I have worked in many places that say we value the culture, but the actions spoke differently. And again, it's not naming names, just reality. The culture in the business I support is a very hardworking, we care. So I have to show that to the folks who are in the building that when you want to move your career forward, that we're going to help you create programs that will give you what you need to be successful. And that's pretty much what I'm trying to do is just scale the knowledge of this business because it is a unique animal. And you talked about technology being a little bit of a trouble spot for you at Disney. We work around lots of landmines that make it difficult for people to do their jobs, but ultimately what it boils down to is you want them to just be successful. And it's been hard because there's pliability here. Like there's lots of opportunity to grow because the business needs help in other spots. It's great for career progression, but are we setting you up for success by putting you in a role if you don't have what you need to learn? And we're just trying to catch them up there because there's just, unfortunately, that's just a reality. It's great for career growth, but again, how long does it take you to learn a job? Because now you're just learning it on the job and you're going through lessons. I've learned that way throughout my career the hard way. Sometimes we make mistakes with how we approach things, but can we just reduce that friction for them? And that's primarily what our goal is.
Yeah. And I know that that you might not say this because I think you're coming across as pretty level-headed, if not humble with this as well. But in the preparation call, you mentioned that somebody had said to you that they couldn't have done this without you. There's being essential to your organization, which I'm not sure everybody in learning and development could say that they are.
Well, I appreciate that, but it took me 15 years to hear that for the first time. So you can imagine my shock when your champion business partners do say things like that too, because for me, that's all I need. I don't need the pat on the back. I don't need the shout outs. I just want to know that I'm doing a good job for you. That's just how I operate. Because then I can continue to focus on those things. And it's just the validation of like, whatever you're doing is working. Just keep doing it. And we just had a similar call recently with that same partner. And he just said, hey, like, do you think we're good business partners? I'm like, yeah, absolutely. He's like, then let's just keep going. Like, there's nothing else to talk about. We don't need to get into our feelings about stuff that happens as we're trying to work together. And I lead with green if you're familiar with that protocol, but I care too much. So sometimes feelings become real. But my business partner was like, you're good. Just keep going. And I was like, okay, take a deep breath and just keep.
Yeah, you take that one home. But so, Brian, it sounds as if you're not one for standing still and resting on your laurels. So what's next on your transformation journey?
It's going to sound a little bit cliche, kind of looking at what we had talked about before this call. We really do need to, we embrace AI, we use it every day, but I think it's become this thing where it's kind of fallen into our world and we just kind of figure out how we want to use it. And there's been some guardrails set up by the company, which has been great. They've really given us the thumbs up to move forward with how we need to move forward with AI. We need to embed it in our operation. I don't want AI. I don't think it's going to take my job today, maybe in 5 years. Not to alarm anybody. I don't know. I mean, it's a fluid situation, but I think what's important is that we don't ignore it and that we embed it into what we do. So I'm looking to really gain some proficiencies from it. How can we deliver more faster? And that's the basis of how we're moving forward. Our VP has tasked us with serving the whole business now. How can you amplify your impact beyond the 5 business partners that you have to the rest of the business? In order to do that, I don't want to put cost pressure on my business line by adding to the staff. I want to do it in a way that unlocks capacity. So we're really looking at efficiencies, not only from how we design quicker, because we're a do-it-all shop, but how do we automate some of our work during the week? How can we take some of the noise out of our work week, the calendar appointments, the emails, like what can we identify that will make us work smoother so we can really focus on the hard work that needs to get done that takes brain power for us to do. So I would really say it's the focus on that. And then for me, it's an evolution into really integrating some of the technology suite that we have in learning into the existing programs to move those programs forward.
Brilliant. Now, Brian, as we look to wrap up the conversation, first of all, I want to say that what you're doing is clearly a masterclass. So anybody listening to this is going to see this is a masterclass on how you do it. This is how you build influence and move your function forward via meaningful impact and thinking strategically about it, as you've mentioned. But Brian, for the L&D leader listening who wants to start a transformation of their own, but perhaps feels stuck in the expected and requested version of L&D, what's the first move you think they should take?
Be prepared to wow somebody. And I know it's not part of the prepared answer that I had, but you asked me that question and I just shot back to my first moment in my career where I took a chance. I was struggling with trying to get something through at a different company. I just started in learning as a manager there and I wasn't being heard. And I had ideas and I wanted them to be seen. So I went and I did the work. It was extra hours. I prepared something and I had an opportunity during a meeting to say, this is the vision that I have for where I want this to go. And our CHRO at the time reacted to it. He was like, wow. He stood up out of his chair. He got up, started asking questions and said, whoa, where did this come from? And I've been thinking about it the whole time. I've been socializing it. People weren't really hearing me. I didn't have my voice yet. So I was proactive in trying to get their attention. And that was the first time that I greenlit something that I've been trying to do, but struggling to launch. And just like we said earlier, that may be harder for someone who are listening to this to do. And I empathize, and there's no easy way to do this. There's no right or wrong way. Everyone's got their own challenges in their business, but it really is that trust moment. Because once we did what I socialized, that kind of made my barriers expand a little bit more. Thought came in, hey, what do you think about this? What would you want to do with this? And then it gets to a point where they just let you run. They just open the gates and say, go. So the one word I would say is you got to build trust with someone, whoever that person is. You got to make them believe that you know what you're doing, because you do know what you're doing. But how do you gain that trust so that they can really unleash your power? And it won't happen in one meeting. It won't happen in 1 month. It's going to take some time. So have some patience for that to play out.
Very wise words. Thanks, Brian. Look, there's so much to ponder over from this conversation. Brian, thank you so much for being candid. Clearly, you reflect a great deal because you had all of this valuable insight ready to share. I know that I can't wait to listen back to this conversation and when I'm not hosting to actually absorb everything you say, because there's so much great stuff in here. And Brian, all that's left me to say is Thank you so much for being a guest on the Learning and Development podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. What a pleasure just to talk shop with you. I have so much respect for what you're doing in this space, and just a pleasure to just be along for the ride and just be able to share some of my experience in this journey. So, been great.